We're talking to Paul Boden, who is the created with other people the Coalition on Homelessness back in the 80s, and he is now the director of the Western Regional Advocacy Project, which is an umbrella coalition of organizations on the West Coast, otherwise known as W.R.A.P.
Right.
Whose main goal in working together is to do what? Will you explain that?
It's to influence the policies and the priorities of the federal government in addressing homelessness and poverty and social justice issues in the United States.
And what's your connection with other similar organizations nationwide?
There are incredible number and some really incredible groups across the country that are working at the local level to defend and protect and advance the human and civil rights of poor and homeless people and immigrant community people and families across this country. And our goal, our mandate, is to bring that work and that spirit together to really change the way our government, the federal government, addresses immigration, addresses poverty, addresses humanity across this country.
Okay. So let me introduce myself. I'm Carol Harvey, I'm a journalist. I've been writing about homelessness for about 10 years and now a videographer. And we're talking to Paul in the W.R.A.P. offices in San Francisco. And we're talking specifically about an art show that Paul put together with artists. And it's called Hobos to Street People. Can you explain a little bit about that art show?
Yeah, and to clarify, I didn't pull this show together. The work that Art Hazelwood did with the Western Regional Advocacy Project in creating a report called Without Housing that calls for a new deal in the United States had brought him to a place where he was able to artistically make the connections between what was going on in the call for the original New Deal and how that connects to issues today. And so it was the work of W.R.A.P. that he credits with bringing inspiration to making that connection. But clearly the show was put together by him.
And this is a piece that he did quite a while ago called From Reagan to Bush, for 25 years, a spirit of abandon. And Paul's going to talk a little bit about this piece in a minute. Now, could you explain, first of all, part of W.R.A.P's mission is to, on the 75th anniversary of the New Deal, talk about a new deal. Could you explain that?
Yeah, and it didn't start, the connection wasn't made at the 75th anniversary. In fact, the Coalition on Homelessness in San Francisco has done billboard campaigns in the past at bus shelter sites across the city calling for a new deal. People working on homelessness and poverty in America have been looking at the New Deal as, wow, if only we had a government that saw things quite like that. If only we were able to recreate the energy and the organizing, the community base that had to be pulled together to give the kind of power for that approach to addressing poverty to happen again in this country, it's going to take serious community organizing. It's going to take committed public education efforts and honest and articulate public education efforts. And it's going to require us to branch out from a homeless niche or an immigration niche or a children's issues niche and start talking about a human rights campaign and a social justice campaign that crosses all specters of our community. That's when we get the kind of systemic change that was created in the New Deal, not by electing a president, but by doing the groundwork and the local work and the organizing work and the education work to give power to our true representatives to make the kind of change that we need to make.
And you have traveled back and forth between Washington and San Francisco all the time in that in that service, don't you?
I spend more time in other cities than I do in Washington, D.C. You have to build the power first before you're going to influence Washington, D.C. But yeah, in my current role, I'm sent out there periodically and working with other national groups that have a social justice commitment and trying to really build a campaign that isn't about an election or a particular bill or a particular segment of any community, but is about all of us and the rights that we should be entitled to.
Can you tell us just briefly what cities you travel to on the West Coast? I know you're in Seattle a lot.
Well, no, the Western Regional Advocacy Project, the people I work for are based in Seattle, Real Change, in Portland, Oregon, Street Roots and Sisters of the Road, in Los Angeles, Los Angeles Community Action Network, San Francisco, and Berkeley.
San Francisco's Coalition on Homelessness,
San
and in
Francisco Coalition on Homelessness,
the one that
and
you were
Building
instrumental in.
Opportunities for Self-Sufficiency in Berkeley, and Street Spirit, a project of the American Friends Service Committee in Oakland.
And so can you explain the connection between what you're telling us and this beautiful piece of artwork that, by the way, I have to say, I really admire Paul's use of artwork to bring across these ideas. Can you talk a little bit about this painting by Art Hazelwood and explain what it's all about? And just say that, again, this was one of the paintings in the Hobos to Street People show that was put together by W.R.A.P and Art together.
Yeah, the purpose of this piece was to give life to data that is incorporated in the report. If people have looked at any issue around poverty, around racism, around disability rights, you'll see that there's thousands and thousands of reports. There's tons and tons of data. But each seems to get regurgitated, one report after another, without having any real impact. And it's our belief that one of the reasons for that lack of impact is because it's not visual and it doesn't have a visceral connection to people that may not be the ones that make up those numbers.
So help us understand the visceral connection between this chart, which is just a chart, and this wonderful painting that Art did.
Well, if you look closely, not even that closely, it's pretty blatant that the artwork itself is the data that's in the chart.
He's constructed the artwork around the actual chart.
He's taken dry, lifeless data and given life to it. He's given an actual reality to it. So you don't just see the numbers and you don't just see the data. You also see that it's talking about housing and it's talking about human beings, that there's a beginning point to when it started, and there's a direct connection between when these outrageous cuts to affordable housing programs started and the advent of contemporary homelessness today.
Can you show us exactly where the cuts started in terms of this chart?
They start right here in 1979. That was during the Carter recession. Reagan came in 1980, and from 1980 to 1983, they gutted it. This is public housing funding. And if you look here, you see the housing up top. You see it start dropping, and then you see it gutted in 1983.
Okay. And these figures here represent homeless people? Yes.
And the woman coming out of the ashes with her little child and walking out of the ashes is what happens when you destroy the housing that was available and affordable to poor people. You create homelessness.
And then looking at the chart itself, we're looking at a flat line.
You see that right here.
Yeah.
And
right
you
here.
see this is Hope 6, which isn't so much in the graph. This is homelessness funding here.
Okay.
So as you see homelessness funding going up, the rise of homelessness, and you see the housing funding being decimated and crashing down, you make the direct connection. You make the direct understanding. You bring life to it, and you bring the actual numbers to it, and you say, look, you eliminate affordable housing for poor people, you create homelessness in America. No question about it.
Excellent.